Great. Thank you I'm grateful for you to be here with us. So very quickly, I will go on with the next slide. So first of all, why this is important to talk about open educational resources, and UNESCO has been working for long about it, but started already in 2012, but really, the general recommendation on open education resources came out in 2019, where there was really a global framework that was formally adopted, urging member states to develop supportive policies and practices for open educational resources. And then this was reiterated in the Transforming Education Summit in 2022. Why? Because in fact, open education resources were considered or have to be considered as digital public goods and a very powerful solution to improve access, quality, and equity in education. And why that? Because, open educational resources are freely accessible. They should be openly licensed, as it is the same name says. And there are a lot of educational materials that are available or should be available through these educational resources if they were found and accessible for all. We will discuss this a little bit later. And so in our report, the Global Education Monitoring Report 2023, that we published 2 years ago, we analyzed different pathways that countries have been taking to support us access to connectivity and open education resources and to train teachers on these new and constantly evolving issues. And to inform this part of the report, we have had a very interesting and insightful background paper that Ben and Dominic will talk about later. Why we discussed this in the framework of the Global Education Monitoring Report? First of all, because open education resources are really important and increasingly more for different reasons, but also because it was very important for us at the GEM report to present really robust, impartial evidence on the different parts of technology. And in fact, what we have found and highlighted in the report is that evidence about technology in education is scarce. So very often it is not used knowing why and what, in fact, why or when it is effective. And very often it is used with very small pilots or even evaluation that are made by those that are really the first part and have a very important interest in technology. However, as the report clearly say, is that technology has a huge potential to support equity and inclusion, especially because it can help to reach out disadvantaged learners by diffusing knowledge in engaging and affordable formats. So I think here the link to open education resources is even more clear, because clearly one of the advantages of open educational resources is to be accessible and to be open and affordable. In some cases, and that's why the report also put a lot of emphasis in some specific, under specific conditions, technology can improve the quality of teaching and learning basic skills. It doesn't happen often, but it happens sometimes. And there are different reasons for that. So I call you on reading the extensive report. You will enjoy a lot. But in fact, it's because we have I mean, we see that digital skills are becoming the norm, and um, and so the young generation, especially, are much more used to use digital tools than we were in our generation. But not for all again. Not for all again. There is a very unequal distribution of digital skills and the way people learn and use technology. The digital divide is very large. It's not just the digital divide in in tools, but also the digital divide in people and how people can use the technology. Um, there is also the important fact that digital technology can support management and increase efficiency. And the report highlight and emphasize that technology also comes with risks, and it should be seen as a tool only when learners' best interests are placed at the center. And so that's why the report is titled "A Tool in on Whose Terms." And in fact, that's really calling for policymakers and a lot of other stakeholders to ask for main questions before deploying technology. And this is also relevant for all type of technology. Is it scalable? Is it sustainable? And is it equitable or appropriate? And this is something, the appropriateness, I think it's something that is very important with respect to open educational resource, because is it appropriate for local context, for example? Going back to the issue of open educational resources, what are the promises of these resources? Access and cost, adaptation and localization. Of course, open educational resources allow materials to be adapted to context, to languages, to culture, the quality and diversity, the possibility of collaborative content creation, peer contributions, digital formats. And the alignment, of course, of open educational resources with SDG 4 and the sustainable development goal for on education and equity, because open educational resource can be seen as a lever to widen opportunities. However, there are gaps and in the current status of open education resources. We have seen in the 2023 report, and thanks also to the background paper, that awareness is rising, but mainstreaming is still limited. There are production and geographical and language biases. For example, nearly 90% of open education resources repositories are created in Europe and North America, and 92% of the material is in English. So that's really cool about appropriateness and reflecting if these resources reflect local knowledge, local context. There are barriers, of course, as I was saying before, infrastructure, but also skills. So not just by the students, but also from the teacher side. And there are also barriers that are maybe described in terms of policy, regulation, and quality assurance. And so all these points really call for increased attention to how these open education resources are created and put up on, uploaded on the internet and on the platforms that contain these resources, because the risk is that rather than shrinking inequality, they can widen inequality. And then at the end, advantaging the most affluent size of society. So there are key policy and system conditions for open education resources to succeed, again, reflecting the barriers in terms of access and infrastructure, in terms of governance of regulation, but also in terms of quality assurance, localization, teacher preparation, sustainability, and inclusive and equity lens. And there is something that we may we may be discussing today, and it's very interesting, is looking forward artificial intelligence and open education resources. Because in this respect, we hear a lot about talking about artificial intelligence in education, how this goes with open education resources. There are again opportunities and risks, both for the creation, for the localization, for the curation and the personalizations. And the risks are again very important because there are quality risks, the reproduction of biases, the concern about how open are these resources. Calling for increased attention to the issue of AI tools and the proprietary discussion, the issue of transparency and teacher skilling. So without further ado, I will show some guiding questions, but before that, I think that I will leave the floor to Dominic and Ben to present, and then we go back to the questions. Thanks a lot. Dominic, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Anna. So I noticed my internet is a little bit unstable. I will just make that as a quick note. I'm over here in Angola speaking to you. But firstly, I'd like to thank the German Commission for UNESCO, for Barbara Malina, for inviting us, and also to my colleagues from GEM, to Anna and Laura, also to give Ben and I an opportunity to kind of represent the work we did, but also to kind of have a slightly fresh look at what we found. And so I will share my screen. It should hopefully work.
Dominic, we cannot see your screen. Laura, do you have the slide by chance? In case...
I am back. I will try it again. If sharing itself is making the system crash, then I would just ask Anna or Laura or maybe to share the slides. But let me just try one more time.
yes, it works. Now.
Okay, perfect. Great. Okay, it's only a couple of slides as well, so I'm hoping it'll work out. So yeah, so Ben and I just took a look at what we had done as this background paper, where we took the overall topic of the Global Education Monitoring Report, looking at tech and education, and then obviously with a focus now on open educational resources. And I think the whole topic of the report we did together with Robert Schuer as well was really the discussion about, we've had a long development of OER, especially in the policy space as well. And so we're asking ourselves, looking at the research we saw, are we at a tipping point? And so we thought it would be fun to ask the same question now. Did we reach a tipping point? Are we still at a tipping point around the use of open educational resources globally? And have we actually reached what we would hope with open educational resources, which is some forms of transformation within the education system? So, as I said, I think we very much liked also the title used for the Global Education Monitoring Report, which was Technology and Education on Whose Terms? So the idea, because open education resources has very often been connected to digital learning, but it's very important around open educational resources to also always be asking these questions of on whose terms is it being used? Is it really achieving the potential that is often talked about with open education resources? So this is what we looked at, in particular through the lens, have we reached some interesting tipping point? And I think there's three things that we particularly noticed. The first, and there's some very nice recent examples of this, is OER. In the past, we had very many dedicated strategies or policies on national level or on regional level, which were OER policies. So if we were to look at this from a product management perspective, and we'll come back to this, basically OER is the solution. And sometimes, and this is a discussion we often have when we're talking to our students in our master program at the University of Novogorica, sometimes it's more important to actually be asking about what are the educational challenges we're trying to overcome through the use of OER. And now it's very interesting that this way of looking at OER seems to be becoming much more popular. So OER really as an integrated part of educational reforms overall. Two examples we can see from where I'm, which is over on the African continent, is a recent strategy around EdTech done by the African Union, and also the Ethiopian national strategy in particular for supporting vocational education. In both cases, they talk very clearly about OER, but they're not OER strategies. So this is very interesting for us because it seems OER has become established as part of an overall solution to supporting change in education. Related to that, perhaps, was one discussion we had in the report as well about talking about what are the expectations of using OER. And we talked about two types: generic expectations of impact and derived value. So generic would be the kind of classic idea, let's say, of saying, okay, through OER, we can make learning resources more affordable. We can make them more adaptable. So if we take, as Anna just showed, the kind of properties of open educational resources, of course, these are the values at the same time. You can change it, you can share it, you can adapt it to new learning purposes. Derived would be, what is the overall effect of doing something like that? And interestingly, it would be interestingly, if we look at the German national OER strategy, it's very interesting there where the actual overall strategy is talking about the need for pedagogical innovation, the need for maybe a new way of looking at education, and how OER can play a role here. So this is related to my first point, but it's really talking about the derived value, also as a way of supporting collaboration between teachers. At the same time, we have, I think most research over the past 10 years always comes back to two kind of gaps which we have around open educational resources, which is we have a high level, a high awareness level. Often it's still seen as a gap because many people still don't fully understand what OER are or what they can offer. But more importantly, even when people say they know what OER are, it's whether they use them or not. And in particular, whether they use them in a way that is kind of thought of in terms of reuse, changing, adapting to new settings. And so studies are still showing that we still have low implementation rates of OER. And very often it's more focused on reuse than actually focusing on adaptation, and repurposing. This is why also already in the report that we did for 2023, we also looked at maybe a more pragmatic perspective on open educational resources, and particularly saying that it's very interesting if you see that teachers, for example, they would see the value in using open educational resources as enabling them to adapt or customize existing materials, while learners, for them, it's probably much more important just to have freely accessible quality materials. So this is kind of important when we say that the learning resources don't have to be everything for everyone, but it's more important to think about what is the specific value in a very specific context. In the I mentioned already the German national strategy on OER, and we have different working groups. And one of the working groups we have is on pain points, and it's actually going exactly to this question, because it's saying, okay, well, if we do see persistent low usage, or really fully exploiting the full potential of OER, maybe it's also because in many cases, in particular when we're doing OER projects, we're not really asking the right questions. And so we did a nice blog about this when we took a approach from product management called jobs to be done, which is pretty much going to the point I've already made, which is for teachers, they've got different tasks, different jobs they want to do with OER. To learners, learners are quite happy in most cases where the materials that they would otherwise be not accessible to them are made accessible to them. And we'd already be achieving a huge value by making materials accessible. So we're arguing a little bit that one important point for mainstreaming, for making OER normal, is to also focus much more on the real value to different target groups. One thing we see very often, and Anna has already mentioned it, is there are some challenges around using OER. In particular, it's about discoverability. Do people actually find the right appropriate materials which are licensed as OER and can be adapted? So discoverability. It's also, if we're going to talk about the opportunity to customize the materials or the learning paths that materials are connected within, then can people do this? And so artificial intelligence, AI, is one way to kind of improve the UX, improve the usage of open educational resources. So in other words, it does seem, and I think there's a big debate, we alluded to it only briefly in the report, that OER is a partway a solution to some of the at least kind of usability issues around open educational resources. However, of course, this also comes back to, and again, Anna mentioned it, it comes back to ethical concerns around bias, data privacy, potential of concentration of power with a few technical providers. So in essence, this just brings us right back to the overall theme of the GEM report on technology and education, because we can also ask ourselves again, why were the first promoters of OER really interested in it? And the foundational vision was very much about democratization of learning and shifting control, for example, from commercial publishers to educators. This is important to consider now, because if we start becoming very reliant on the most apparent, the most accessible AI solutions, perhaps the same dynamic is just coming in through the back door, because then we're starting to use the AI solutions mostly emerging from Silicon Valley under a very strong kind of commercial motivation. So technology on whose terms is still a very, very important question to be asking, even if we see that AI is perhaps solving some of the usability problems around open education resources. Now, overall, I think whilst we can say it's important to prioritize access, agency both of learners and educators has always been a major part of open education. And here as well, we should still be asking this question: are we really promoting agency? So overall, we could say we're at an unfinished.
I think we have lost the connection to Dominic. So Ben, I don't know if you want to come in
Yes,
on this. Thank you.
yes, please. Um, I think what Dominic wanted to say is he showed us the last one, the unfinished transformation, because what we have tried to stress is that from the report we wrote in 2022, and if we look back, what are the main challenges? Is this tipping point still the case, or are we in the next phase of transformation? I think we are in between, because and then I come to the first question. Maybe you can show it because I had a glance today at the questions.
Can you see it?
No, not yet. How can AI meaningfully support educators in creating and adapting OER while ensuring that the content remains accurate, culturally relevant, and context appropriate? I think if we look what is happening now, then I think that there is a convergence between OER and generative AI. David Wiley, he's one of the big names in the field of OER. He stressed that open education can become generative AI education, meaning that teachers, especially educators, have the choice between reusing existing OER or generating new materials via large language models like ChatGPT. The aim remains the same, producing OER, but the approach shifts from make and share OER to generate OER using Gen AI. This brings forward two existences. It means that the potential of adapting OER and contextualizing, personalizing, can be reached much more easily using AI. And then you can fit better the target audiences you're aiming at. But it requires two key elements, and that it brings us back to the question of the ethical concerns. It means that the two things have to be shared openly with open licenses. Perhaps Creative Commons has to be added to it, a CCAI license, like open prompts and open weights, meaning that not only the outcome will be shared and openly produced and openly shared, but also the prompts which lead to new materials using OER databases and the weights attached to the questions you're asking the AI. It means, in my opinion, general AI offers impressive potentials, but again, like Anna stressed in the introduction, that it has to be done within specific context. Technology has to be guided and embedded in regulations and guidance. That would be my first answer to the first question.
Thank you, Ben. Thanks a lot. May I just, because I'm talking, and of course, this calls for idea, and one of the questions that is embedded that really comes having listened to this presentation and thinking about open educational resources and Gen AI is we know all what are the biases in AI. And I mean, we know that one of the issues that may be really important for open educational resources is the fact that we have barriers to access open educational resources, either because of digital skills or because of tools. So how to make sure that AI helps everyone that wants to enrich open educational resources and doesn't really be limited to those that own the platform, that know the tools, that know the skill, that have the skills. And so this go back to a little bit to the second question. So what are the safeguards that need to exist, either in terms also of regulations, but more than that, what are these safeguards that can be made so that open education resources are or meet some quality standards, and especially they do not widen inequalities? This is a question for you, Ben, and Dominic. So who wants to answer?
Well, let me start. The question you're asking is a question which is in the middle of a discussion within the Netherlands. We have two big programs, national Dutch programs. One program is Innovation in Education. It's a technology program of which OER and AI are parts. And the other one is, this is for TVET and higher education. The other program is aimed at primary and secondary education, K-12, and it's aimed at producing and reusing open education resources. And the question we are facing is, how do we use generative AI in it? And we do not yet have an answer to this question. There are some institutions, higher education institutions, they have started to say to their educators, which are the producers of OER and the users of OER, you are only allowed to use this particular generative AI model and not another one. So, but that is only a local solution. A more general solution we have not yet produced. There is a laboratory, AI laboratory, in which all higher education institutions collaborate in order to find feasible, practical, and ethical answers to the question you are posing. I'm sorry, that's all I can say about it.
It's really important what you are saying. And so, Dominic, do you want to add anything on this point? Thank you.
Yes, I would, because I would also like to take this issue that it's, I think whenever we talk about technology in education, then I think it's also good to go back to basics a little bit, which is that the learning scenario is always at least made up of three elements. We have the learner, we have the teacher, and we have the content. And I think it's very important not to fully focus on the content. And I think sometimes when we're talking about technology, and now in particular about AI, I think we've had this a bit with open educational resources also in the debate, we focus a bit too much on the content side. I think one of the most important things maybe that we always talk about when we talk about open educational resources is making things revisable and editable. And so I think this already will help about the worry of quality assurance and also hallucinations on that side. But I think the other one is that an educational setting is made up of imparting knowledge, but also conversations. So I think AI can also help us, not so much maybe on always providing exactly the right knowledge. I think we probably need to get a human in the loop on this, but maybe it can help us by giving us more time and opportunities to have conversations at scale. And so I think this could be a way that we actually improve the learning environment. And I think this is something that when we make the difference between open educational resources and talking about open education, then in the sense of open education, this kind of open discussion, really like thinking through what is being discussed and what it means, can be really important. And I think it is important to remember this so that we don't get too fixated by technology discussions and worried about weighting in particular AI models, because maybe that's not our business.
And in fact, this goes also back on what the report was saying, the Global Education Monitoring Report, the importance, really the emphasis of the human dimension rather than focusing on the technology. And in fact, the title "Technology as a Tool," it is a tool, is the tool that would may probably can help to solve some of the education challenges. So that's why the discussion started with education and not with technology education and this what you were saying, and something that we didn't touch much, but I think in what you were saying is very important, is the role of teachers in this. And I think this is really critical because yes, there is the learner, there is the content, there is the technology, there are all the teachers are both learners and users and creators, I think. So, and how to foster really this trilogy of function in the teachers, I think that's a very important question because it calls for training, skills, etc., etc. What do you think about that? How to really?
I think you're right. Let me take up the issue of the generic value of OER and the value of and the what was it you called it, Dominic?
Sorry, the derived value.
The derived,
The derived.
Yes. When I look back at the discussions we are having here with educators and teachers, as soon as we start a discussion about the derived values, what people can do with OER and what the advantages, the value plus is of OER, then the discussion is much more easy. Then people understand the value of OER because it's practical. Then we shift a discussion of ethical, political arguments into a very practical argument. Oh, I can do this. Oh, that's more easy. And then the way of teaching them, learning to work with OER, this trajectory becomes much more easy. And then we are able to convince people of the value plus, the let's say the users. We put in the middle the user perspective of the teacher, of the educator, instead of the value of OER in its intrinsic values, which is important because they are needed, but they are needed in order to achieve what educators want to do in their educational practices.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much. And there is something that is embedded in what you were saying. And I think it's also the issue of trust, ethics, trust, and that's really matter a lot for this discussion. So I think we need to wrap up this session, and it was very interesting to listen to you, Ben and Dominic. Thanks again for having contributed to the GEM report with your background paper, and thanks a lot for having you here to this discussion. The Global Education Monitoring Report will distribute and, of course, disseminate the recording of this session. So if you want to watch it, you are very welcome. And also to look at this material, the GEM report, the Global Education Monitoring Report, and the different background papers that have looked at these issues. So thanks a lot to all, and
okay.
thank you.
Thank you for the invitation again.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you
and
very
thank
much,
you,
everyone.
Barbara. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much.
Thank you
Thank you so much.
so much. Thank you.